an author who's the writer of the book, The Summer I Died 20 Times. Yes, you heard me right, 20 times. It's Repeatedly Dead Fred. Hi, Fred. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me on.
Fred, before we get into your amazing story, can you just explain to people who you are and where you grew up and stuff?
Sure. I'm just, your average Canadian. Grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Played a lot of hockey, a lot of football, a lot of rugby. And at the time, the summer I died 20 times happened. I was a college professor. I was teaching finance and economics and things like that.
What led you to teaching? Because I'm a teacher as well. So what made you want
Yeah.
to go into teaching?
Um, I guess I've always had a bent for teaching. Um, I didn't start off as a teacher. I started off, I've done an MBA in marketing and finance, and I was doing the corporate world. And then 9/11 happened, and a lot of jobs dried up. The company I was working for got bought out. And then I had a buddy who was a dean at one of the colleges and said, "Why don't you teach for me?" And that's how it got started.
And did you enjoy the teaching?
I totally enjoyed the teaching and the interacting with students. I totally did not enjoy the grading and the marketing. And I guess the millennials started to swarm and that sense of entitlement. But there was always some good students.
Oh, brilliant. So like you said, you've wrote a book, The Summer I Died 20 Times. Do you want to get into what happened?
I started experiencing what the doctors initially thought was just sort of fainting spells. And often when I would faint, or what they thought was fainting, I would also hit my head. So there was a lot of concussions, and they couldn't figure out what was happening to me because this is all out of the blue. Um, if you have something called vasovagal syndrome, people that see certain things and faint, or they see the sight of blood and they faint. That doesn't typically happen to somebody all of a sudden in their mid 40s. So, that was kind of ruled off the table eventually. And then they started thinking I was having heart attacks. But the blood tests they kept running to show I was having a heart attack didn't show any of the enzymes that show up when your heart muscle starts to die. So they really didn't know what was going on. And I think I need to say, I'm not saying any of this to diss the medical system. Every system has its positives and negatives. I just happened to run into a whole bunch of negatives at the front end of my adventure. The team I have helping me right now is like, they're all stars or Hall of Famers, or, whatever the British equivalent of that is. But, they eventually figured out that I had a condition called sudden onset full heart block. And what that means is the electrical system in my heart started dying. So it stopped sending signals to tell my atria and my ventricle to beat. And when your heart doesn't beat, no blood gets pumped, no oxygen gets exchanged, and you're kind of dead. So, and then I would collapse and hit my head on whatever was most convenient in the neighborhood.
No warning signals. Like, did you not get any tinginess, or it would just all of a sudden come on?
Yeah, it would come on so fast. It would be like, if you ever watch movies like Top Gun or with the fighter pilots and they go to black, it's like that, only quicker. And you just don't have time to react, and you just collapse, and your body has backup systems galore, um, to help you even when you collapse. So when you collapse, you sort of collapse almost in a fetal position to protect your head from getting, bonked. Um, I just uh, I just collapsed better than my backup system could protect me. So, whether it was a curb, a manhole cover, a cement sink in a public washroom, um, it was like laser targeted. That's what my head was hitting.
Was that make you not want to go out? And because obviously the embarrassment maybe as well of just falling over. Was that stopping you from going out or anything?
Well, I didn't know how serious it was. And then
Right.
after you bonk your head a few times and go through some oxygen deprivation, your cognitive abilities are pretty decreased. And you're not really thinking about things like that. You're thinking about why can't the doctors figure this out? And eventually they did. To be honest, the most embarrassing thing is getting thrown into an ambulance. For whatever reason, that that was very triggering to me. And I don't know, I've probably been in maybe 15 ambulances, and it's also very disorienting. You're used to being in a vehicle and looking forward, and you're in the ambulance and you're looking at everything backwards, and you can't figure out where you are. Like you know where you are, but you have no idea where you are. And so it's just so many weird things that go on when you're hospitalized, and it's just not the norm.
A lot of people, I don't know if you're religious or not, they see the white light when they've died. Obviously, your heart stopped beating. Do you see any of that, or is it just a blackout?
Yeah, I didn't see the white light. I am religious. I'm Jewish, and so our vision of heaven and hell is slightly different than the secular or the Christian views, and even the Christian views I don't think are exactly what are taught in the church. Uh, you know, I don't think people are floating around with angel wings on clouds and uh, stuff like that. So um, I didn't see anything like that. I had a few out of body experiences, and to be honest, I feel kind of ripped off. You hear about these amazing stories, and I wrote about a couple of them in my book. Um, and I don't discount that anybody has those. All our experiences are unique, and I'm sure some people have them. Some people may exaggerate them or downplay them a bit, but I'm sure people have those experiences, and it's got to be fascinating.
When you saying about an out of body experience, what do you mean? Did you like sort of look over yourself?
Yeah, yeah, I had that a number of times, and it's pretty freaky. The if and I'm not going to speak for every Jew in the world, but so consult your local Orthodox rabbi to get some confirmation or contention about this. But we believe there's a soul in the body, and at death, your soul separates from your physical body and tries to go wherever it goes. And to me, it felt like my soul was out there looking down on my physical body, but it was very confused. And it didn't know if it was supposed to go back into the body, like, is this the last call? Or, you know, am I supposed to go up to heaven or wherever the soul goes once you die? And it was like this huge tug of war. And it was physically uncomfortable to me. Um, and just disturbing. So that's my experience on that end of it. Is that what's supposed to happen to everybody? I don't know, but
Like,
that's what's happened to me.
at the start, you felt a bit let down by the medical system. Why was that? They literally just send you in the hospital and then send you home again for it to happen again, or
Pretty much. I think they just went on the assumption that there's this middle-aged fat white guy, so whatever's happening to him is his fault. He could have taken better care of himself, and after 10, 12, 15 times of trying to prove I've had a heart attack and not being able to prove that I've had a heart attack with the test they've been using for 50 or 60 years, you might want to start looking at other causes. And that never happened. It was like that medical bias. The That's what really annoyed me. And to be honest, it annoyed me more after I started recovering because I was just too smushed up to be really thinking about that. And one of the things about the book is because I lost so much memory um, from everything that went on, things don't come back to you linearly. And so when I was writing the book, I remember something in 2019 that happened in 2012, and it would just piss me off to no end. Like how could they have done this or not done this, or why didn't they look at this? And so it was very frustrating and eye-opening, and just all sorts of feelings started welling up. And it still happens to this day. I'll be in a conversation with somebody and they'll ask me a question out of left field, and I was like, I wonder why that happened or didn't happen.
Once they diagnosed you, what was the process next?
So the prognosis was the full heart block, and they have a simple fix for that. It's a pacemaker. So a pacemaker is a little, like a stopwatch size or pocket watch size supercomputer that they implant in your chest with a couple of wires. And there's dozens of different types of pacemakers for different afflictions. Um, and that would replace the electrical system in my heart that had died. And that's what there. And it worked relatively well. I mean, they do literally thousands and thousands of these a year. So it's a pretty standard procedure. And it was supposed to last for 12, 15 years before the battery went out. But as it turns out, my story is quite the anomaly. And it all this started happening to me again in 4 years. So in
Wow.
2013, it started with the collapsing and hitting my head, and the doctors not being able to diagnose what was going on because it never occurred to them to look for it. And what was happening is one of the wires in the pacemaker, the insulation had cracked. So they're these they're small wires, but they're just like a regular electrical cord, and if the insulation cracks, things are going to short out. And if the pacemaker shorted out, I shorted out. So it was back at square one. And so they eventually figured out that needed to go. I needed to have that wire replaced. And then they also decided might as well replace the entire pacemaker. And we went into that surgery. And what I found out when I got on the table was that they don't put you to sleep for this anymore. My first surgery, they put you to sleep, so you don't know what's going on. And this one, it's more like going to the dentist. They just freeze up the area and start cutting you open.
Wow.
And so I wasn't really prepared for that. And I guess when they started cutting me open, they must have moved something just in the perfect way, and it shorted out the pacemaker. And I could tell, you've got this big scoreboard monitor that they have in front of you with all your vitals, and I think it's called a fluoroscope, so they can see inside you with the dye and where everything's getting placed. And I could tell before it was up on the monitor, because I was looking up at the monitor, that I had shorted out, and I just said something like, "Oh, I'm gone," and that was it. And then I woke up 10, 12, 15 seconds later, and just bedlam, just crazy.
How panicky were the doctors? I bet they were like freaking out.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like it's not like on TV when somebody goes code blue, for a heart stoppage. And, they've got every person and every doctor and every medication and every tool waiting, right in the vicinity. It wasn't. It was bedlam, and I guess this doesn't happen very often. So
They weren't
um,
prepared. And
yeah.
you said as well, where obviously you were collapsing, you've hit your head a numerous of times. What damage does that cause to the brain?
Well, it's hard to quantify it. I mean, as a general concept, you have post-concussion syndrome, and we see that with a lot of athletes, more and more. In the I guess in the UK they call it football, and they're realizing that more and more players are getting concussions from heading the ball,
Yep.
and the occasional kick to the head when you miss the ball. Um, NFL players, lots of concussions, MMA. Um, so, the brain's so complex that, what happens to me from a head strike will be totally different than what happens to you from
Yep.
a head strike. And probably just like, you experience with your wife, somebody can have the exact same clot in the exact same place. And the symptoms they'll get from that stroke will be totally different.
Yep.
So I lost a lot of memory. Um, as I mentioned, I'm Jewish, so I've been learning Hebrew and prayers since probably kindergarten. I lost an entire language.
Wow.
I mean, my friends brought me my prayer book one night, and I started trying to read it, and I couldn't read like anything. So it took me years and years to gain that back. Um, I've had problems with depth perception, uh, just speaking in general. Sometimes words are hard.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, just pretty much everything. Balance. Um, I had trouble, walking downstairs. I remember experiences where I've been in the subway and you're walking down to the lower levels to get to the trains, and I would just lose my balance. And people would look at you like, dude, it's like, 12 o'clock. Like, how can you be this drunk already? You know, but it's not. And, thankfully, a couple of people grabbed me and prevented me from falling. But then they give you the look like, you're pathetic, you know, but so it also gives you a huge awareness when you see other people struggling that maybe, you have to give them a little bit of grace too.
No, I totally get that because where my wife's got no feeling left side of her body, when we get on public transport, she usually sits in a disabled seat. And the looks you get from
Mhm.
people when they get on, because she's young, they're thinking that
Yeah.
she's being ignorant and rude because she's not getting out of the disabled seat. It's not like, as you said, it's not like you're walking around with a sign saying, I've got this hidden disability. Like,
Yeah. And I know I've had, I think it's 12 heart procedures. And, for at least 3 months after the heart procedure, you're not supposed to really do anything with great exertion. And because I've got all these wires in them that are trying to heal and scar up inside, um, they'd prefer I didn't take public transport, because sometimes you have to be on the holding onto the rail. And if you get jerked, I mean, you could disconnect yourself. So if the subway or the bus wasn't really crowded, I would take the disabled spot, because I don't want to get jostled. And then you get the looks
yeah.
like you've experienced. You just get the looks like, you know,
And also, we found as well, so like going to the opticians, when they do the eye test and they turn the glass over to say to it 1 or 2,
yeah,
it takes my wife longer to process things. The optician was getting really annoyed with her because she was taking a long time to decide which lens. And
yeah,
I had to explain to the optician. And even though after I explained, the optician still got to a point where she was tutting and stuff like that. So, and I could see in my wife's eyes, she started welling up because it was a struggle. Like,
yeah.
it must be so hard sometimes to not be able to, not explain to people, but it must be hard sometimes, like, not getting that people don't understand.
Yeah. And my parents had a lot of health issues growing up, so I was sort of around it for a long time.
Yeah.
But being around it is not the same as being in it. And I've really had to learn how to, excuse me, be more patient and be more eloquent and be more firm with certain doctors that, to be honest, they were just smug, arrogant bastards.
Yeah.
So they were like, they were absolutely amazed that I would know anything about my own condition. And so it does take some practice and some courage on your own part to say, hey, doctor, like, knock it off with the attitude and let's work on the problem here. Right. Um,
Exactly.
I don't know if you know about my story. I had a stroke at birth that nobody noticed.
Oh wow.
And I didn't find out until I was in my mid 30s. And I am sort of hemi paralytic on my left side. Well, not sort of, I am. Um, not fully, but I do feel like I'm split in half vertically. And I could never figure out why I couldn't do certain things as a kid until later on when I was diagnosed. This when I was diagnosed, they didn't have the tools to help me. But at least I knew that I had a legit cause behind some of these things that I couldn't do like normal people.
No, I get that
So,
as well because I'm dyslexic, but I went diagnosed when I was 16. And I don't know if you know about dyslexia, but it's like the clumsy person syndrome, or like my writing's like a 5-year-old and stuff. And I used to have a go that I was the lazy kid, or I was the kid that weren't
yeah,
trying. And it weren't until, and like you said, there's not much you could do about dyslexia, but at least you know what's wrong with you, and then you can accommodate for what's happening.
yeah. Um, I'm guessing your school system, you get report cards every year.
Yeah,
So I'm pretty sure yours read like mine, would do much better if he'd only apply himself and,
yeah. So
needs to shut up in class.
exactly, yeah, the talkative kid. But in a way, I find that it helps with the teaching because I sort of am on the student side a bit, so I understand where they're coming from. So it gives us, and I ain't afraid to sit there because I deal with the students whose behaviour is really bad. So they get sent out of class, they get sent to me. It's called the refocus room. But I ain't afraid to sit there and we could be writing something. I'll be like, right, how do you spell? And it's like we're working together, so it builds up a good relationship. It breaks down that us and them barrier.
Yeah. You're lucky you can take those experiences and turn them into a positive.
And
So,
talking about that, how do you turn your experience into a positive? Because my wife's mental health dips up and down, obviously, with her condition. And obviously, you've been going through this and you went through a stage of not knowing what was happening and dying and stuff. How do you stay positive? And do you have down days?
well, of course I have down days. I mean, even the most successful people in the world have down days.
Yeah.
And I guess having watched my parents go through everything they did, even though I wasn't fully aware of everything that was going on with them, I sort of absorbed their resilience and their optimism by osmosis. So, and I think most of us have a resilience gene, and it's just like a muscle. And the more you can exercise it, the the stronger it gets, and the more resilient you can come. Sorry, you can become. But I certainly didn't do this on my own. I was blessed with a couple of communities that just basically adopted me, and they came visited me in the hospital, and they gave me lifts to doctor's appointments, and they helped me grocery shop, and they cooked me meals, and it's just I couldn't be the person I am. And recognizing that I did have a bit of that, you have to be more positive and keep learning. But with all, those dozens of people that just rallied to my side. And one of the big lessons I've learned is you have to let people help you. And I know so many people, whether they're battling cancer or arthritis or whatever, they just get so secretive.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe it's what you mentioned before. Maybe it's the embarrassment. Like, I don't know why you'd be embarrassed you had cancer unless, you know, you were playing in asbestos for 20 hours a day on
Exactly.
purpose. Um, you know, let people help you. There's so many people out there that want to help other people, but you have to let them.
And you decided to write the book. What was the decision behind writing the book?
Um, it was twofold. One, of course, I was going to be, the best-selling author since JK.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen, but it's done pretty well. Um, but I really wanted to share my experience with others so that they all know that whatever ordeal they're going through, if you can find a way to have a positive attitude, there's possibly a way out. Like, the world doesn't have to come crashing on you. There is hope. Maybe not always think it's going to be easy, but you can learn to act for yourself and find resources that aren't initially being offered to you. But you just have to be, the squeaky wheel.
Process of writing a book. Do you sit down for like a week and just write, or is it little bits and bobs every night? How do you put a book together?
Oh, well, again, this is not the traditional way to write a book. So I know I'm a good writer because I did a lot of writing for business and marketing, but writing a book is a whole other animal. And I initially started trying to journal, and I just wasn't very consistent doing that. So I had a lot of little pieces. And of course, I also had the problem that I wasn't remembering a lot of things. So I got, okay, what happened next? And I might not have remembered what happened next for like 2 or 3 years. So it was a very interesting process. And I had told the story to a lot of people, and somebody alerted me about a short story writing competition. So, but they told me like it was a week before deadline. And so I tried, and I don't remember what the word count was. They said, you had to be below whatever. And I think I went like 1,000 words above that. And I just didn't have the skill at the time to chop it down and get into something coherent. So, but from that, I had a better foundation to write a book. And then, to be honest, the upside of COVID, you couldn't go out, you couldn't go anywhere. And where I was living, we had a beautiful deck overlooking a park. And I just went out there every day and made myself write, 800 to 1,000 words. And that was the majority of the book got completed over COVID.
And did you self-publish, or did you take it to a publisher? Or
I was fortunate enough to find a publisher in the US, a smaller independent publisher. And he sort of emphasized with my story a little bit because he had also had some heart issues. So um, I was introduced to him through somebody I know running a Facebook group. And, it seems all these things have to fall into place.
yeah,
And, you know, they just did for me. And, from that, I ended up spinning off a podcast. And, then through the podcast, I meet people like you who are amazing people and, fighting their own incredibly difficult battles. Uh, and yet they decide, okay, so I'm fighting this incredibly difficult battle. Who can I help fight their own battle?
exactly.
Like, it's, in Yiddish, there's a word, you're a mensch. Like, you're a really high quality individual doing such good things for other people. And you know, might be hard in the little room that you're in right now, but give yourself a pat on the back because you certainly deserve it.
No, that's a brilliant message. And if people want to buy the book, where can they find it?
I'm on Amazon, so there's a paperback and a Kindle and a recently released Audible book. And I have to say, I didn't do the voice for the
Oh, no,
Audible book,
it's a shame.
and it's it's very weird hearing somebody read your story trying to be you. It just really is. Great job. And I'm blanking on his name right now because although I'm repeatedly dead Fred, I'm also repeatedly brain dead Fred occasionally. And I'm sorry, I think it's John. John, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
And if people want to watch or listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
I'm on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and
That's
I
not.
think I'm on Amazon. So it's called the Dead Man Walking Podcast, and you have to use the full name because there's the Dead Man and there's Dead Man Walking. So it has to be the Dead Man Walking Podcast, and I probably should have chosen a better name.
And what we'll do, we'll chuck a link in the description to all these places so people can get there quick.
Okay, that would be great.
Right,
Thanks.
coming up, usually I have one last question for my guest, but I'm actually going to ask you two.
Okay.
This first one is your answer to yourself will not change your life journey so far, but if you had 30 seconds with your 13-year-old self, what would you say?
Oh gosh, that's an incredibly difficult question. um, ask more questions. Just ask more questions. Whatever they're about, just ask more questions, and you'll find yourself getting more ammunition to take yourself through life.
This last one, this is a new question that I've only asked one other guest. If you could be
Oh no, now
remembered
I'm nervous.
if you could be remembered for one word and one word only, what would it be and why?
I guess inspiring or motivational. Um, that I help people move their lives along in a more positive direction. Lots of people have helped me, and I think it's only fair that I put myself in a position where I can help other people move their lives along. And we all want to make the world a better place. You put a smile on somebody's face, you could change the world.
Now, that's a brilliant message to end with. Well, Fred, thank you so much for joining us. It's an incredible story, and I'd love you to come back on in a couple of months down the line and see. We'll go a bit more in depth to the medical side of
Sure.
things.
That would be amazing. I'd be happy to do it, Lee.